Hello, Assalamu alaikum. Welcome, marhaba, ahlan wa sahla. Welcome to Riwaya third international webinar series on Isnad after canons, analyzing origin, nature, and significance of an evolving tradition in post-canonical world. On the outset, I would like to just introduce Riwaya in a couple of words. Riwaya is a student initiative of Jamia Madinatul Noor, an Islamic seminary in Calicut dedicated to the revival of Islamic intellectual tradition to facilitate Hadith scholarship and open new horizons in Islamic studies for particularly local students. The first webinar of Riwaya was organized in 2021 during the pandemic, and it was followed by the second edition in last October 2022. And today we are in the second lecture of third international Riwaya webinar series. And the first inaugural lecture of this edition was given by Professor Konrad Hirschler, the director of CSMC, Uni Hamburg. And after this lecture, there are 4 more lectures to follow. And today we have an outstanding academic and inspiring scholar for us whose research work and themes he's dealing with uh, mostly resonates with the audience of today's event. He is Professor Dr. Ruggero Vimercati Sanseverino. Pardon me, like I'm not familiar with Italian names. And he will enlighten us on the topic, the performative meaning of Hadith transmission in late formative Sunnism. Professor, the stage is yours. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, first of all, for this invitation, for this Riwayat al-Hadith webinar. And I think my presentation corresponds to the title of this seminar, Riwaya, because this is exactly the theme of my talk today. And I will try to enlarge a little bit to get from the historical consideration of Hadith transmission to what it may mean today in the context of Islamic theology, because as you mentioned, and thank you for this very kind introduction, as you mentioned, I'm working at the Center for Islamic Theology at the University of Tübingen. So it's an institute of theology, which is a little bit different. I would like to emphasize from Islamic studies in the usual sense. So maybe we can discuss about this at the end of my talk. I would like to start now with 3 anecdotes which show a little bit an aspect of Hadith transmission which I think has been neglected very much as well in research, in academic research, but also I think in official contemporary Muslim discourse on Hadith. You know that there are debates. How do we handle Hadith? What is the meaning of Hadith? The significance of Hadith for today's Islam, etc. And I think that this discussion is lacking of an important dimension of Hadith transmission, which are expressed, among others, in anecdotes like these, which I have here in my PowerPoint presentations, and which I believe you know that there you can find a lot of this kind of reports and anecdotes in the handbooks of Hadith sciences. So here are just 3 examples which I would like to read. Muhammad ibn Sirin, very known Tabi, of course, as you know, occasionally laughed, but when a hadith of the Prophet was uttered in his presence, he immediately fell into a state of humility and modesty. Khasha. So the term of khasha already is very interesting because, as you know, it is usually mentioned in the context of prayer, of salah in the Quran, for example. So it's very interesting that this term is here mentioned by Ibn Sirin. The second anecdote, a contemporary of the companion Ibn Mas'ud, so an important companion for Hadith transmission, but also for fiqh, as you know, for Hanafi fiqh in Kufa, reported that he rarely dared to utter the phrase, Qala Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So the messenger of God has spoken. But when he did, he was afflicted with grief so that I mean the companion of Ibn Mas'ud, so that I could see the sweat running down his forehead. And according to another version of this report, of this anecdote, his eyes were flooded with tears and his neck veins were swollen. And the third example, Mus'ab ibn Abdullah al-Awan, also, of course, very known, said, Malik ibn Anas would not utter any hadith of God's messenger except in a state of ritual ablution, out of exaltation, ijlalan. Intending to speak about the hadith of God's messenger, Malik ibn Anas would perform ablution, prepare himself and put on his clothes, and then only he would speak. When asked about this behavior, Malik is reported to have responded, I love to magnify the hadith of the messenger of God. And on another occasion, I want the hadith of the messenger of God to be understood. And Mus'ab said, when Malik was asked about that, he answered, this is the hadith of God's messenger. So we have in this kind of anecdotes, which, as I said, are very numerous in the classical sources, we have here a dimension of hadith transmission, which is expressed, which, as I said, to my mind, is neglected, but which I think is important in order to understand what hadith transmission actually meant for those persons who were involved in it, for those persons who were the actors of this transmission. So to have an understanding of hadith transmission, let's say from the view of the actors themselves, okay, what happened when you transmit hadith, when you recite hadith, when you listen to hadith, when you hear them, etc., when the act of transmission happens, what happens? There's something which happens apparently if you read these testimonies, okay, it puts the transmitters in a specific or in a certain physical and psychological state. Okay, they're weeping, they become pale according to other traditions. Okay, they become silent. So or somebody who Ibn Mas'ud, who was very near to the Prophet, of course, even had difficulties to utter the phrase "Qala Rasulullah." Okay, so these type of sources show that for the persons involved in the transmission of hadith, the transmission of the act of transmitting the hadith meant something more than just conveying a sort of information. There was something happening. When you transmit hadith, something happens, which puts them in this state, okay, in this extraordinary state of veneration, etc., which we'll see now in the rest of the talk. So this is the starting point, which I would like to make. And coming now to the point, sorry, just the next slide, to the point, what does this tell us about our understanding of hadith? Do we have a sufficient understanding? I'm talking here about a sufficient academic understanding, okay, because we are talking in the context of academia. Do we have a sufficient academic understanding what hadith actually is? And what hadith transmission means? Does academic research on hadith, did it take into account this dimension of hadith transmission, which I express in these anecdotes, in a sufficient way? And how does this question our own understanding of hadith and of hadith transmission? And I'm talking here about the academia, but also about the way hadith is debated and discussed in the contemporary Muslim public. And my thesis is that no, our understanding has neglected this aspect, okay, and that this leads to a reductive and one-sided understanding of hadith and hadith transmission. So this is why it is necessary to consider this. And I'm showing to you here a definition of hadith, which you can find in the Encyclopedia of Islam 3. of Pavel Pavlovich, so a known scholar in Hadith studies and Islamic studies, who is engaged in the historical critical study of Hadith transmission. And this definition, I think, is quite good. It's a good definition. Sorry, it's a good definition if you compare to definitions which you find in former editions of the Encyclopedia of Islam, for example. Okay, so let me just read it. Hadith, Arabic literally speech, narrative. So here already you have the term narrative, which is interesting, I found. A hadith in plural is a technical term for Muslim tradition about the exemplary practice of the Prophet Muhammad, enshrined in his words in aqwal and deeds, af'al, and his tacit approval, takrir, of his companions' words and deeds. So here already, I think we have some interesting point, okay, that hadith are defined as af'al, aqwal, af'al, wa takrir. And this is, you know, a known definition of hadith, but which is a usuli definition of hadith. This is a definition of hadith which you find in usul al-fiqh. Okay, it's not the definition of hadith which you find in ulum al-hadith, which is larger, as you might know. Okay, so hadith about the shama'il, for example, which are not interesting for usul al-fiqh. Okay, they're not relevant for normative for norm finding. They belong to hadith, of course, or hadith about akhlaq and things like this. Okay, so this is already a certain definition, okay, of hadith, but which you find also in contemporary Muslim discourses about hadith. It's often this normative view of hadith. Okay, hadith as normative source, which is, of course, it's true. Hadith is a normative source. But it's not only a normative source. It's more than that. And this shows, I think, a problem. But as Pavlovich is nonetheless very precise, because he says the technical term. Okay, so this is a definition, a technical definition in a certain context of a certain science. So I continue. Hadith is also each individual tradition about what the Prophet said, did, or textually approved, in contrast to the ontological status of the Quran as God's uncreated qadim speech. So you know the different, this contrary hadith for qadim. Okay, so the eternal, and the hadith is that which happens in time. Okay, the contingent, something which is conditioned by time. It's an event. Okay, that happens in time. So hadith, the substantive form of the adjective new, connotes created speech. With respect to its epistemological function, and these may be designated as ilm. So this, you know, as well in early sources, if especially if you follow the Ahl Hadith sort of theology, if the term ilm is mentioned, what is meant is knowledge which comes from Hadith. So this is, I think, a good definition of Hadith. Okay, but even this definition, I think it's not. It misses an important dimension of hadith. So, and this is what I would like to show in this talk today, at least some aspects of it. What this says about, yes, our understanding of hadith, and how by considering this dimension of hadith, okay, which is related to experience, I would say, to the experience of transmission, we will get a more full understanding of hadith, a better understanding of hadith, which is also important in view of Islamic theology today, so of Muslim life and thought today. So I will skip to the next slide, because there are in academic research some approaches which, let's say, show, okay, that there is another dimension of hadith transmission which has been neglected until now. So I would just like to mention two important examples. And the first one is a research, an article by Pierre Larcher in 2005, who is a linguist, a sociolinguist, who has written an article about the term hadith from the point of view of linguistics. And he shows that the term hadith has, if you consider the verb hadasa, or the root of the verb, that there are two meanings, okay, two basic meanings, which is the event, as we saw also in the definition before, okay, something happening, something which happens, an event. Hadusa, for example, hadusa or hadasa, and then haddasa, which is relating something, okay, narrating something, relating something. And that in the word hadith, which was then used for the prophetic traditions and transmissions, there was a development from the meaning of event, okay, hadith as an event or something which happened, to the meaning of narration. And that, in fact, the word hadith, as it is used today, means both. Means actually the narration of an event. Okay, so the hadith is not only a report in this sense, but it is the narration or the fact of relating something that happened. And both belong to hadith, the event which is narrated and the narration itself. Okay, so we have always these two aspects which are constitutive of hadith, and you see this, of course, in the very text, in the textual form of the hadith, because as you know, you have the matan and the isnad. Okay, so you have the matan as the representing the event which is narrated, and then you have the isnad as a documentation of the narration. Okay, the tariq al-riwaya. Okay, so which way it has been narrated. So this is already interesting, and I will develop this a little bit further then. And there's also an interesting approach by William Graham. So this is an important historian of religions who worked in a comparative way, okay, who could compare different religious traditions, and he emphasized that what he called the performative dimension of religious writings. That is, that the view that what religious writing means is only related to its content is reductive, because the significance of religious writing, or even its meaning, expresses itself also in its performance. So the performance of this writing is an important dimension of it, okay, which must be considered in order to understand what this religious writing means. So he is referring here primarily to the Quran, of course. So the fact, for example, that you, in prayer, okay, you recite the Quran, or the recitation of the Quran in general, okay, is a form of giving meaning to the text, or that this performance of the Quran, okay, communicates also the meaning of the text in a totally different manner, or in a complementary manner, as if you just read it. Okay, so this needs to be considered, this aspect of performance. And I think that this is interesting for the hadith as well, because what is hadith transmission else as a form of performance of the hadith? Okay, and that this is an aspect that needs to be considered. So starting from these considerations and the sources I mentioned in the beginning, I would like then to address this question, which I try to formulate here. What happens when hadiths are transmitted? Okay, what happens according to the description and the actors of the transmission, of those who are involved in the transmission, and in their own words. Okay, what do they say about the transmission and what it means and what happens? And what does this mean for our own understanding of hadith? Okay, this is what I explained already at the beginning. So I would like to talk about this interrogation in three parts, in three ways, and then with a sort of conclusion, which of course is not exhaustive, but may just give some points. So the first one is looking at the history of Hadith transmission in classical sources. So this is maybe what was also in the announcement of this talk, the post-classical period. So here I will look into two sources which show this performative dimension of Hadith transmission, not Hadith tradition, of the Hadith transmission. And this is the important point, its prophetological basis. But is that behind the way the transmission is understood and perceived, etc., this is founded on a certain prophetology, on a certain understanding of the meaning of the prophet for the believer. But that this is related, that you cannot understand how transmission, how classical Hadith transmission works without considering prophetology, without considering what the prophet means, okay, for the religious lives of the believers, even after his death. So the second then part will be on hermeneutics. So this is more in a contemporary approach, let's say, where I try to develop where I try to develop a view on Hadith which considered it as a certain type of text, which is a testimony. The testimony, there's a certain epistemology behind it, etc. Even now in contemporary philosophy, okay, the theme of testimony, how testimony works as a source of knowledge, is very much discussed. And I think that the Hadith is in fact, it's a testimony. And I try to develop what this means for our understanding of Hadith. And then thirdly, if we have time, on the basis on this, I'm trying to develop a criticism, okay, what the Hadith is not. So in the sense, a criticism of what I would say theologically problematical uses of Hadith today, and the examples of Salafism and Jihadism. And then, as I said, the conclusion. So the first three parts are all based, each one of an article which I published on these topics, and I'm trying to relate some points of these. So looking at the time, so if it's too long, you just tell me. Okay, I will try to stick to the time. So the first one, history, the performative dimension of the Hadith tradition and its prophetological basis. Here, as I said, I'm relating research results which I have published in a study, as if the prophet stood in front of you. Okay, the performative meaning of Hadith transmission and its prophetological background in late formative Islam. So this is actually the title also of this announcement, so which has been published in Beyond Authenticity, towards alternative approaches of Hadith narrations and collections. So here I'm analyzing two sources. And first source is Khatib al-Baghdadi, as you know, central figure for the development of Hadith sciences in the Sunni tradition. Very important, and he has written books on the various aspects of the science and transmission of Hadith, trying to systemize, okay, what before has been a little bit different strands of topics and themes and collection, and he tries, to systemize it and to create a unified, more or less unified sort of corpus, okay, of the science. And one work is Al-Jamia li Akhlaq al-Rawi wa Adab al-Samia, okay, which is an important work, which in research has not so much been considered until now, which you can translate as a comprehensive treatise on the character traits of the transmitter, Rawi, and the behavior of the listener, Samia. Okay, so this work is really on the ethical and behavioral dimension of Hadith transmission, and which, for those who are involved in Hadith transmission, okay, for the ulama, the Muhaddithun, was a very important aspect of their science and of their activity as a scholar. And you can find in every handbook of Hadith science, okay, if you look at the Muqaddimah ibn Salah, you look at Ramah Rumuzi, and etc., you always find a chapter on adab. Adab al-Muhaddis, Adab Talib al-Ilm, etc. So you know this because you are engaged, I suppose, in this type of scholarship as well. But this is an important dimension and implies, of course, a certain vision, a certain understanding of the transmission of knowledge, which is not the same, for example, as you have in modern universities. Okay, so the modern conception of transmission of knowledge, where the personality and knowledge are divided. Okay, so if you are like me, you are a professor at university, the only criteria is your knowledge. Okay, whether you have the competence, you know, to teach the subject, etc. So, but your personal integrity, as long as you're not a criminal, doesn't play any role. Okay, you can do in your private life whatever you want. But this is, of course, for a muhaddis, it's not the same. Okay, the requirements are different. Here you see a connection, a strong connection between the personality of the scholar and his knowledge. Both have to correspond. And this is actually what this treatise is about. And the argument is not a moral argument. And it's not saying, well, the Hadith scholar needs to be, you know, honest and of good adab, etc., because this is good. No, because it's necessary for the transmission. That is, if the scholar doesn't fulfill these requirements, the transmission does not really function well. Okay, there will be a problem. Of course, this is an ideal, okay, I mean, which was not always reached, but I mean, this is the idea which everybody has to seek in this sense, okay? But there must be a correspondence between what the muhaddis transmits and what he is as a person and what he represents. Or let's say he has to represent with his personality, with his conduct, his akhlaq, his adab, what he transmits. Okay, if there is a discrepancy between the content, I mean the sunnah that he transmits and his personality, transmission doesn't really work. Okay, so this is like the argument of Khatib al-Baghdadi in this book, and which he tries to show as a various aspects. Okay, but what does this mean again? Okay, for our understanding of hadith transmission, I think it means, and this is what I tried to formulate in this article. It means that hadith transmission cannot be reduced to the supply of normative information. Okay, it's not a simple, you know, saying to somebody, okay, X is epsilon. So, but there's something more which is implied in this act of transmission, okay, in this process of transmission, which implies the personality of those who are involved in it. And this in an ethical manner, okay? There is an ethical aspect of transmission, let's say, adab and akhlaq. So, but it involves a moral and spiritual engagement from both the transmitter and the student, okay? As well as a collaboration between them, determined by rules of conduct. Okay, this is, I think, an important point. There must be a collaboration between the transmitter and the one who receives the transmission. Okay, so transmission is not just as you do today. I mean, you go in a library and somebody gives you a book and says, read it, and then, okay, you have an expertise in this. No, it implies more, okay? There must be a sort of collaboration between your teacher and transmission and the student, okay? And this is what he shows. So I tried to analyze this in various aspects. So one aspect is the receptivity of the one who receives the transmission, for example, and the recognition of the authority of the one who transmits, and then the cooperation, which is made possible in this way. Okay, so there are Khatib al-Baghdadi develops on the act of of the actors of transmission. Okay, which qualities they need to have, which ethical qualities always. Okay, we are talking here not only about some sort of theoretical knowledge, but it's really the personality, okay, which must be involved. The suitability, the ahliya, and the interaction. Okay, how is this interaction? And then a second aspect, exaltation, aesthetics, and awareness. Okay, the act of transmission and its circumstances. There are considerations by Khatib al-Baghdadi in which circumstances the act of hadith transmission should happen. Okay, so for example, there should be a place of tahara, of course, okay, of purity. The people should be clothed in a decent manner. Perfume can be perfumed, etc. It's like an act of ibadah, you know, as you have like these sort of acts. Okay, there are some circumstances which support, if you want, the meaning of the transmission. Okay, which express that the transmission there's something happening if you transmit hadith. Okay, this is what is expressed also in the anecdotes which I mentioned at the beginning. And then, what is the purpose and the results of transmission? So, of course, memorization, transcription, but also spiritual growth of the persons involved. Okay, spiritual growth, which is expressed in terms of nearness to the Prophet, of earning the shafa'ah of the Prophet, for example, of barakah, etc. Okay, so there is this aspect which for those involved in hadith transmission was apparently, obviously, important to them. Okay, which was part of hadith transmission. So this shows us that, and yes, and the final point, I tried to show that in this way, the hadith transmission can be considered as what you call in modern academic theory a speech act. Okay, I don't know if you are aware of this kind of theory. It is a theory which developed in linguistics, and it's about the fact that if you say something, or if somebody speaks, this speaking is not only a communication of some, you know, of the meaning of the words, but it's actually like an act. So, for example, if you say, this guy is nice, well, it depends how you say it. You can say it in a sincere way, or you can say it in an ironic way. You can say, oh, this guy is nice. So in the sense, well, he thinks that he's nice, but in fact, he's not nice. But the words are the same. This guy is nice. So both have the same words, but they are different speech acts. So in the first one, okay, the meaning is, okay, this guy has really some qualities which allow to describe him as a nice person. Okay, and this is what you mean by saying this. But the other one is, it's actually the opposite. Okay, so this is in simple terms, okay, the theory of speech act. It tries to understand what is involved, okay, when somebody says something, when a speech is delivered in some sense, and which impact that what is said is meant to have to those who listen. Okay, and my idea in the article was to say that hadith transmission is actually a kind of speech act. Okay, and this is what the treatise of Khatib al-Baghdadi is actually about. He shows which conditions must be fulfilled so that this speech act is successful. That the hadith transmission as speech act, that is, as involving more than just conveying some information contained in the words, that this is successful, that it works. Okay, so that the meaning is transmitted, which is not only a theoretical meaning, let's say, but which is a more than this. Okay, so that through the transmission of hadith, there's something that happens, some sort of event, let's say. Okay, which is, as we said, it's implied in the meaning of the word hadith. So okay, I will go now to the next text, which I analyzed also in this article, which you might know, which is the Kitab al-Shifa by Qadi Iyad, which is a very known work, of course. It's the most important treatise on prophetology in Sunni Islam. Okay, it's translated in many languages and edited many times in the whole Muslim world. Al-Shifa bi Tariq Hukuk al-Mustafa. So this work treats not only prophetology in a general sense, so who was the prophet, what is his standing, what is his qadr, his dignity, etc. But it treats also, as the title says, it's hukuk, the hukuk of the prophet, which means the rights, okay, which the believer or the follower of the prophet has to fulfill towards him. So it addresses, if you want, the relationship between the believer and the prophet. Okay, how should this relationship look like from an Islamic point of view? And this is what is addressed in terms of hukuk, okay, which comes from also the notion of hukukullah, as you know, which you have also in Usul al-Fiqh, but I think especially from al-Muhasibi. Okay, he took it from al-Muhasibi and applied this concept of hukuk in this sense to the Prophet. So, and the different hukuk of the Prophet are, of course, the fact that you believe in him, that you obey him, al-ittiba, al-mahabba, okay, that you love the Prophet, etc. So this is the theme of Qadi Iyad's Shifa, okay, amongst others. And in this part of the book, you have also a chapter on the transmission of hadith. Okay, you have the chapter which is Ta'zim Riwayat al-Hadith. Ta'zim Riwayat al-Hadith, so which fits very well to the seminar. So Ta'zim Riwayat al-Hadith, I think you understand what this means. Okay, so the high consideration, okay, of the significance of the transmission of hadith. And here you have Qadi Iyad, who was himself an important hadith scholar, okay, who wrote himself a handbook on the science of hadith and the commentary of Muslim, etc. And he in this chapter, I think he explains to us why for hadith scholars and for hadith transmitters, the transmission has this superior dimension, okay, which I mentioned at the beginning, okay, this dimension related to experience, I would call it like this, okay. There is a dimension in hadith transmission which is not only cognitive, okay, you give an information, but there's a form of experience. And what is this experience? Okay, well, what is it? In other words, what is it that happens when hadiths are transmitted? What is the event in this case? Okay, of what does this event consist of? And just to give you some points, okay, of course I cannot address the whole study now, the whole article, but just some important points. I would say that Qadi Iyad shows us that the transmission of hadith, why this is significant and why there is the necessity of ta'zim, is because it is an experience of the prophetic speech. Okay, listening to the hadith means to listen to the prophetic speech. Okay, this might seem to you a very simple, let's say, statement. Okay, of course, what else should it be? Of course, this is quite simple. But in this simple statement, there's a lot of meaning in it, I think. Okay, which we haven't explored yet, sufficiently, at least in academic research, and even, as I said, in contemporary Muslim discourse. So he says, or just to give you an example, he cites some examples as well. When Abdul Rahman ibn Mahdi, okay, as you know, a very important figure also for the science of Hadith, recited Hadith, he used to order his disciples to be silent and to say, so Mahdi used to say, do not raise your voice about the voice of the Prophet. Okay, so this is a Quranic verse, as you know, لا ترفعوا أصواتكم فوق صوت النبي. Okay, which in the Quran refers to a specific event, okay, when people used to come to the Prophet, yeah, Muhammad, and shout, etc. So this is a sort of teaching of adab towards the Prophet in the Quran, okay? But for Imam Mahdi, the validity of this verse is not confined to the time when the Prophet lived. It is addressed to all the Muslims, even to those who live afterwards, okay, like us today, for example. Okay, so this is still valid today. Okay, it's not the meaning. I mean, the validity is not confined to those people who came to the Prophet in the 7th century in Arabia, etc. Okay, but it's valid for all Muslims. And he interpreted, so I continue, this Quranic verse as meaning that it is incumbent to be silent during the reading of Hadith, as it is when hearing the Prophet speak. Okay, and this is, I think, the important point. That is, those involved in the event of Hadith transmission should behave as they would behave when the Prophet is there, in the same manner, okay, with the same sort of yes, adab and behavior. Okay, so of course, if you imagine you are in front of the Prophet, okay, you wouldn't speak aloud, etc. Okay, you would be silent and listen and have a khasha, okay, what was mentioned in the beginning in the anecdotes. And the second example, second citation for this, Abu Ibrahim at-Tujibi said, it is obligatory, okay, for every believer, that when he mentions the Prophet, or when the Prophet is mentioned to him, that he be humble and awed, yakhsha, okay, again the same term, and that he be reverential, and that he refrains from his movements and feels the reverence and exaltation that he would experience when the Prophet stands before him, and that he behaves according to how God has educated us with regard to him, okay, to the Prophet. So we see in this type of descriptions, and this is the point which Qadi Iyad makes, that Hadith transmission should be the object of ta'zim. Why? Because during the transmission of Hadith, you experience the prophetic speech. Okay, you listen to the Prophet speak through the Hadith. And the act of transmission enacts this event of prophetic speech. And this is why, as Khadib al-Baghdadi showed, okay, there are conditions which must be fulfilled in order that this event can actually take place and happen. This event of the prophetic speech, and that the transmission and relation of Hadith can be experienced as an event of prophetic speech. Okay, there must be conditions which need to be fulfilled in order that this may happen. Okay, that the speech act, if you want, may be successful. And when is the speech act successful? It is successful when those who are involved in this speech act, who listen, who transmit, etc., get this or share this experience of the prophetic speech. Okay, this is a point, I think, which you can find, so I just gave you here some examples, which you can find in classical sources. Okay, in the history of the transmission of Hadith, or how Hadith scholars themselves perceived what they were doing and why they were doing it and what this meant. Which takes me now, okay, to the second part. Concerning the hermeneutics. Okay, so what can we take from this for our understanding of Hadith? As you know, hermeneutics is the art of understanding, okay, which conditions need to be fulfilled so that we can understand a text or anything else in a proper way. So what are we dealing with when we look at the Hadith? Okay, and what does the Hadith actually want to be? Okay, and this I developed in a study published in German, and it asks the question: what type of text is the Hadith actually? And I think this question hasn't been asked enough. Okay, in academic research, if you look especially on academic research on Hadith, I mean in the West, for example, okay, where it was born, this sort of approach. From the beginning, this question wasn't really asked. Okay, it was presupposed that the Hadith is a sort of either a historical report, okay, a text about a historical event, or a normative text, a text about rules. And of course, the Hadith can be both. Okay, there's something of this in the Hadith, but before this, the Hadith is something else, I think. And this is what I think can be explained through the notion of testimony. Okay, the Hadith is not an epic tale, it's not a historical document in this sense, even it is about historical events, of course, and it's not a normative document like, I mean, I don't know, the legal code of Napoleon or something, okay, even if it has normative relevance, of course, for fiqh, etc., but it is first of all a testimony. Okay, this is how the Hadith as text works, how it functions, and how it functions in transmission, especially. So what does this mean? Okay, so I think you can see this first in the shape of the text. Okay, you have in the shape of the text. If you look at of Hadith, you have the testimony and the witness. Okay, who is in this sense the Sahabi, who says, "I heard, I saw, I was with," etc. So you have the witness and you have the witness formula. Okay, which in case of this type of text are always used. Okay, I was there. Okay, there's somebody who was present when something happened, and he relates his presence or his experience of this was happened by saying, I saw, I heard, I was there when, etc. Okay, so these are classical formulas of testimony, which indicate that this text is really a testimony as a type of text. It works as a testament. And it's also shown how the Hadith has been used in the history of Islamic thought. Okay, it has been used, of course, as a testimony of the Sunnah. Okay, this is what the Hadith basically wants to be. It's not the Sunnah itself. Okay, the Sunnah is the event of the Prophet speaking and acting and simply being there. Okay, so this is the Sunnah, of course, and as you know, in classical theology, the Sunnah is considered as being a form of wahi. Okay, so but the Hadith is the testimony of this. Okay, we have the witnesses, the Sahabi, and they do testify, okay, of what happened in this event. And this is now the important point where the hermeneutics come in. And I mentioned here Paul Ricoeur, okay, who is a French philosopher working on hermeneutics, who wrote a very important text, the hermeneutics of testimony. So how can you understand a testimony? And specifically a religious testimony? Because there are different types of testimony. I mean, if you say testimony, you think of, first of all, of the situation in court. Okay, and also in Islam, of course, okay, you have this, and somebody like Muslim, for example, in his Muqaddimah, he speaks about this, okay, what is the difference between the Hadith in this sense and the Shahada in court, etc. So, Paul Ricoeur says, a testimony in a general sense, even in a non-religious sense, is a testimony or about something that happened. Okay? And so it has this empirical dimension. Testimony is about something, an event, something that happened, okay? And then the question is this testimony trustworthy or not? Okay? So this is general for every testimony. But what is specific to religious testimony, and this is, I think, very important, is that it's not only about the empirical. It's only about the meaning and the significance of that what happened. Okay, so, and this is a sort of confession, okay? Religious testimony, it's not only like a testimony before court about an event, whether it happened or not, but it's also about the meaning and the significance of that which happened. And this is, in a religious testimony, this is confessed. It's a form of confession. Okay, the witness confesses, I don't know if the English term is really appropriate in this case, but the testimony, okay, he, by saying in the Hadith, for example, if the Sahaba says, Qala Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he testifies that the event that happened, that this person talked, has a significance and meaning of prophetic proclamation. It is not just an event like any event, but it has a superior meaning by the fact that he who talks, he who acts, etc., is a prophet of God. And in the Hadith, okay, the meaning of this event is part of the Hadith. It's testified in the Hadith. Okay, so you don't have only this empirical, historical dimension in Hadith, but you have a very important dimension which concerns, okay, the religious meaning of the event. Okay, what this event means for those who listen to the testimony afterwards, for example, okay, when the prophet is not there anymore. And this is why the witness testifies to it, because he believes that what he witnesses, okay, that the prophet spoke, etc., has a meaning not only for himself, a significance not only for him individually, but for the whole ummah until the end of the world. And this is why he testifies to this event and says, this what happened here has the meaning and significance of prophetic proclamation, and if you consider it sunnah, even of revelation. Okay, this is meaningful and significant for the whole ummah and even for mankind if you want. And this is, if you follow Paul Ricoeur, okay, this is implied in every hadith. This second dimension. And this is why it is productive, okay, to read the hadith only as a sort of normative or historical information which is conveyed, which is this as well, of course. But primarily, it's much more than this. Let's say the normative is only a way of interpretation, okay, of the testimony and the historical as well. So what does this mean now? This means, and I'm coming into the last paragraph in this slide, that reading the hadith as a testimony, okay, if you understand that the hadith is a testimony, it's not only a text which relates an event from the 7th century in Arabia or something, or it not only tells you what is allowed and what is not allowed, what you have to do. Okay, it tells you this as well, of course, but it tells you even more. Okay, if you understand that the Hadith is a testimony, so this means feeling oneself to be addressed and challenged by the Hadith. Okay, it means that the Hadith speaks to you. Why? Because it's not the Hadith who speaks to you, because you understand that the Hadith is not the text actually who speaks to you, but it is the Prophet who speaks to you through the Hadith, or you perceive, okay, the prophetic meaning of what is expressed in the Hadith, and which concerns you personally or your religious life, okay, in a very direct way. At the same way, which is expressed in the Hadith, in which the listener encounters in the person of Muhammad, just as the witness had encountered it. Okay, so you, in some way, you follow the Sahabi, okay, who witnesses the Prophet said and did, etc., and you experience this prophetic speech that the Sahabi witnesses yourself. Of course, not with the same quality and the same way. It's in an indirect, mediated way, okay? But this is what happens when hadiths are transmitted, as we saw. So I'm going further because the time is, I think, is getting tight. So if you have this understanding of hadith, and now we come to the third part, which I developed in my article on combat prophetology, okay, Sirah and Hadith consideration about some approaches in academic Islamic theology and the view of the jihadist reference to the Prophet. Okay, so how jihadists refer themselves to the Prophet and use Hadith and Sirah, okay, for their type of agenda. And I studied three cases in the sense, in the first being the Sirah of Muhammad Abdul Wahhab. Okay, he wrote a small Sirah, which has been studied by some colleagues as well, and which shows that in his Sirah, he tried to eliminate in some sense, or to, let's say, to put it at the edge, what we can call the supernatural elements of this Sirah. Okay, for example, the Miraj and things like this, okay, which involves supernatural interventions or elements, okay, transcendent aspects, where in his Sirah, okay, they are not prominent, okay, they're put aside, and what is more interesting for him is the political action and the Marazi and etc. Okay, and this is as has been analyzed by Martin Rixinger, a sort of humanization and historicization of the figure of the Prophet. Okay, the Prophet as a figure in history, which lived in a certain period, etc. And that the way that this figure is shown in the Sirah is related to the religious legitimization of a militant agenda, okay, which was then, as you know, the Wahhabiyya followed in Saudi Arabia. That is that the significance of the Prophet Muhammad is confined to his historical existence, okay? It doesn't have any meaning beyond this, his historical existence, okay? He doesn't have any meaning today for the people today, okay? Because he delivered the Quran, he delivered the Sunnah, okay? And that's it, okay? His mission is finished. And now we have like the instruction manual, let's say, and we don't need the person anymore who delivered it. Okay, he doesn't have any meaning anymore for the believers today. And this view, okay, which is, as you know, it's prominent today to some extent in the Ummah, okay, this historicizing view, and actually in the case of the Sirah, it has or correspond to a certain political agenda as well, okay, that because only in absence of the Prophet, okay, only if we say the Prophet, okay, is gone, okay, can his role as executor of divine will be transferred to somebody else, namely Abdul Wahhab himself. Okay, he's the one now who is implementing this prophetic, this program, if you want, which has been delivered by the Prophet in the 7th century. And accordingly, to follow the Prophet, because the itiba and Nabi in this sense means to adhere to a religious political project consisting of the eradication of shirk, okay, through a militant struggle. Okay, so you have here this Wahhabi sort of agenda. And this kind of view has been taken even further by Said Qutb, okay, who, as you know, an important figure of the Ikhwani movement, and who formulated a whole political program, okay, in his Ma'alim fi Tariq, founded on the notion of Hakimiyya. Okay, so this idea of sovereignty of God, which must be implemented in a total way in the whole world, in a political way. Okay, so there must be governments who are founded, okay, on this idea of Hakimiyya, and those governments who do not correspond to this need to be fought. Okay, there need to be a war against these sort of governments, because otherwise it's a form of Jahiliyyah. So this is in simple words, okay, the basic idea of Said Qutb proves to be quite influential, as you know. And it's interesting how he uses, I mean, it's interesting to consider his prophetology, okay, how, because the significance of the prophet becomes confined to his alleged historical role of having laid out a manhaj, okay, what the prophet, as a significance of the prophet is confined to a manhaj, okay, he is a sort of, he represents a manhaj, a method, okay, or a program of action, okay, which the aim of which, okay, is directed towards the implementation, the total political implementation of this Hakimiyya. Okay, so the Sunnah is actually this. It's not more than this. Okay, it's a political program, if you want. So, and this laid the theoretical foundation for what I call combat prophetology. Okay, it's a prophetology which is involved in a sort of civilizational combat. Okay, there is this civilization found on the Hakimiyya, which needs to make war against the other forms of civilization. Okay, and the Prophet is a model for this. Okay, he is a manhaj how to reach this goal, and this is the significance of the Sunnah. Okay, the Sunnah is a manhaj for this goal. So, and this, as I said, makes, of course, of the Prophet a political figure, let's end in the final way. Okay, somebody who, like Che Guevara for the communists. Okay, he's like a model which one needs to follow in order to implement this utopia, okay, of the Hakimiyya. And the third example, which I have been considering, is then the ISIS jihadism, okay, which has been inspired a lot by Said Qutb, as you know, okay. Said Qutb is one of the references of the jihadi movement in general. So, and here we see very clearly how hadith are used by ISIS, okay. It has been studied by Ruggero Vimercati, okay, from Austria, who has been studying the way ISIS communicates, okay, in their official, in social media, but also in their journals, etc. And it's very clear that the hadith for them is precisely, it's not a testimony of the event of prophetic proclamation. Okay, they use hadith actually as a guide for constructing an Islamic state. So it's like a political program again. Okay, it's like for the communists what the Green Book of Mao. Okay, it's an instruction guide. Okay, for a certain ideology, and it's not something related to salvation and the experience of the prophetic speech. And this is how it is used, of course, with this, as Loka says, as a mere symbol of Islamicity, and the Prophet is disappearing as a person. Okay, he doesn't have any importance as person anymore, and thus becoming part of an elaborate system of communication. Okay, hadiths are used in order to communicate a certain ideology, let's say, and to mobilize, of course, Muslims. Okay, and the interesting question is here, why hadiths, even in such a way, still do mobilize Muslims? So there must be something more, of course, in hadiths, okay, which I will try to consider now in my conclusion. But first, what do we do with this today? Okay, if we are trying to think as theologians, as we do in Tübingen, as Muslim theologians, okay, what do we do today with this type of approach towards hadith, knowing that in the classical hadith sciences there was a completely different way of understanding hadith and hadith transmission? Okay, how can we make sense of this in a way that makes sense for today's Muslim life and thought, for example, in Germany? Okay, I mean, your situation, of course, it's a little bit different, but we in Tübingen, okay, we are concerned with the German or European context, which is, of course, a different context, okay, as a country which has a long history of Islamic knowledge and culture, etc. So, first of all, I think there must be a critical approach to this. Okay, a way to develop, yes, a critique of this one-sided and reductive understanding of hadith today. And this is to say that the hadith, as it is used, for example, in Salafism or even worse than in Jihadism, is a form of secularization of the Prophet. Okay, the Prophet here is considered as a worldly figure, as somebody who is relevant only in the context of a political program, of a worldly utopia. Okay, there is no eschatological dimension or spiritual dimension of the Prophet anymore. And that this view, or that this prophetology theologically is problematic. Okay, it's not. It's a reductive and deficient way of understanding prophetology, and this leads to a reductive and deficient hermeneutics of hadith. Okay, to a understanding of hadith which leads into error. Let's say, okay, to put it simple. So, and what is the condition of the possibility for this? Okay, how is this? Is it possible that groups like IS, like ISIS on something, use hadith in this way, and that they have some success, let's say? Okay, I mean, there are people who believe, okay, this is what the hadith said, this is what the Prophet said, this is the meaning of what he said. So in order to be followers of the Prophet, we need to follow ISIS, for example. So I think that one way to put it is that the condition of the possibility of this is that if you understand the hadith without considering the relation to the Prophet, so the hadith only as a text which has a normative or political, etc. information, but not as a testimony. That is, the testimonial character of the hadith is completely ignored. Okay, and only if you do this, it is possible to use the hadith in this way, as a sort of communication, of political communication, of ideology, etc. So this is why it is necessary, okay, to have a more complete, a more holistic understanding of hadith. So this is just one point, of course, okay? We could be developed and argued even more, but I just wanted to give you some idea of it. So now, coming to the preliminary conclusion, so the translation, the English translation is not so exact, so it's not unlocking, but it's understanding or perceiving the prophetic call to God in the Hadith. This is, I think, an interesting way of putting it. Okay, so because as you know, the function of the prophet, as it is laid out in the Quran, da'iyan ila Allah bi'iznihi, etc. Okay, it's exactly not to implement an utopia in this world, but it is to lead people to God. Okay, this is, as you know, the primary function as it is laid down in the Quran of prophets, okay, of any prophets. So if you now try to put the various bits together, okay, which we have discussed in the 3 parts, I would try to formulate it in this way. If we also ask the question, which in research also has not been really answered, okay, why does the Hadith still play such an important role today? If you consider that, I mean, I think even in India, this might be the situation, that there are many voices within the Muslim community who are very skeptical towards Hadith. Who say, yes, the Hadith, okay, but we don't know whether it's really Sahih, and even if the ulama say Sahih, but now we know that history was different, and now maybe with artificial intelligence we can analyze it in a different way, and so we cannot be sure about the Quran, so we just confine ourselves on the Quran, etc. So there are many different types of skepticism, okay, towards Hadith in the discourse, okay, in the public, and let's say in Muslim thought as it is related in academia, for example, okay, modern academia. But at the same time, you have this discourse of skepticism, okay, we have also reformism, you have Muhammad Abdu, etc., etc. But in India, Sayyid Ahmed Khan, for example, okay, so the same type of discourse. But at the same time, if you look at the practice of Muslims, of everyday life, of the way they live their religion, of course, the Hadith plays a fundamental role. And you can meet the same person who says, yes, but the Hadith, I don't know, I don't trust the Hadith, etc. But when you look at how he or she practices Islam, you see that, of course, he cannot do otherwise than to base his practice and his way of understanding Islam on the Hadith. So you have this discrepancy of discourse on Hadith, of skepticism, okay, towards or as Jonathan Brown calls it, the loss of confidence into canonical culture, okay, into transmission, into tradition. You have this loss of confidence, but at the same time, in practice, in the religious practice, Hadith still plays a very important role, of course. It cannot be otherwise. And for observers, for example, in Islamic studies, I'm not talking about Islamic theology, in Islamic studies, or even in public discourse in Germany, for example, okay, they say, but how is this possible? Okay, Hadith, which is a text from the 7th century, and why do Muslims still stick to this text? Okay, even there are so many reasons to say that it's not authentic, it's not reliable, and things have changed, etc., etc. I think you know all these arguments. And I would say that one reason for this is why it still plays such an important role in the life of Muslims, is because of its testimonial nature. It is because the Hadith is a testimony. And because it is a testimony of something, of an experience that every Muslim shares. No matter what type of prophetology, of of understanding of Islam you have, etc. But every Muslim shares this a sort of relationship to the Prophet, a sort of experience of the Prophet, let's say. Okay, and this is true, I believe, really, for every type of Muslim tradition. Okay, even if you go to reformism or to progressist Islam or to very traditional Islam, etc., what they all share, at least, is this relation to the Prophet. Okay, this experience, let's say, of prophecy, okay, which is represented to the figure of Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So, and this is what I think explains, okay, why Hadith is still so significant in Muslim life. So this is what I have to, what I try to have to formulate here. So, why does the Hadith still play such an important role in Muslim life, despite the objections and reservations that one hears or reads about in time and again? It is because the Hadith is a traditional testimony or a transmitted testimony. Okay, I couldn't talk about this aspect of transmission now because of time, but this is also an important aspect of it. So it's a transmitted testimony, and it is the testimony of an experience that is common to every Muslim in one way or another. It is the experience of the prophetic reality or the prophetic speech and personality of Muhammad. The experience of the prophetic call to God, because what is the experience of this prophetic speech? What is the meaning of it? What is its purpose, let's say? It is the experience of the prophetic call to God. Okay, the call to God, which is proclaimed and mediated by the Prophet, which is expressed in the Hadith. And this prophetic call to God still appeals to Muslims today and challenges them in their faith. Okay, it still speaks to Muslims today. Okay, it is something which, what they feel concerns them in a very deep and existential manner. So to the extent that they trust the testimony, okay, the Hadith, they see in the Hadith the light that the Quran identifies the Prophet Muhammad as you know, Siraj al-Munira, and the light that the Prophet promised his community when he called on them to pass on his proclamation. So you know this very known Hadith, Nadar Allahu Imri'in, okay? May God enlighten the person who hears a speech from me and passes it on as he has heard it. So this is my conclusion. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope that you could follow the various points that I tried to develop, and as I said, I tried to resume various aspects which I have addressed in 3 different researches, and to let them converge into a common point, okay, which is that the significance and meaning of Hadith transmission is really the experience of the prophetic call to God and the prophetic word. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. And we had a great time being with you. Thank you for a wonderful session. I think we can go forward with Q&A session. If anyone have questions, can please raise your hands, and I will. Is there anyone? Okay. I think probably most of the audience from India, and in India it's time for Maghrib Namaz.
I see. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
And there are also many international audience here. And I would like to share one of the comments. I think most of the and I'm doing currently my master thesis in Jamia Madinatul Noor on the topic Musalsal collections from Mecca to Malabar. And what I mean, it's as we know, the Hadith tradition, its body, it's even though there is Hadith text, the chain of transmission is also part of that body. And I think your session is all about the veneration of that Hadith text and the relationship of the Muhaddithun with the most beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And in our classes, I mean, in the dars of our traditional madrasa, our asatida and our shuyukh, they used to say that we say this chain of transmission. I mean, we read this chain of transmission as it is a barakah, and may these transmitters may lead us to Jannah in the day of resurrection. So I think that will also have to be discussed. And I think I want to know more from you, inshallah. Is there anyone have to ask question? I think Hamdan Muhammad Ibrahim from Turkey. Are you here? Yeah, fine. You can ask now.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for the fruitful session. And I would like to address a point which you mentioned in the beginning when you defining the hadith. At the end of the discussion, you raised a question, which is what happens when hadith are transmitted according to the descriptions of actors and in their own words, which means I think you meant the riwaya bil ma'na, if I'm not wrong. So I think most of the classical scholars like Imam Suyuti, when he was discussing about the definition of hadith, he clearly mentioned the thing. Like when he mentioned in the beginning, he quoting Hafiz ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, he's saying ما يضاف إلى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. ما يضاف means which is attributed to the Prophet. It can be the meaning and it can be the exact word as the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said. And I think the discussion of the riwaya bil ma'na, the transmission through the meaning, it comes under the discussion of the hadith according to the science of the hadith. There's different definition for hadith and ilmul hadith, the science of hadith. I felt like you described the definition of hadith, which is actually ما يضاف إلى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم من قول أو فعل أو تقرير أو صفة خلقية, to the end of the definition. But when it comes to the ilm al-hadith, the two parts of the hadith is discussed, al-isnad wal-matn, which means al-matn غاية ما ينتهي إلى السند, or the end of the sanad. In that term, Imam Suyuti quoting At-Tibi, it includes the meaning of the sayings of the Prophet ﷺ. So when we understand the hadith or the matan in that sense, like Ibn Hajar defined ma yudaf, which is attributed. So this question, I think it is answered in that sense.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Actually, I didn't address the Riwaya bil ma'na when I asked this question. This is not what I meant. I meant the actors in their own words. I meant the muhaddithun, how they describe the transmission of hadith and what happens and what's the meaning for them. But the question of Riwaya bil ma'na is very interesting, of course. It's very important. And you mentioned Imam Suyuti, and I do have another article where I mention his definition, because as you said, this is something which is not well understood often today. Okay, that that the Riwaya bil lafz is not the condition in the sense for the hadith to be considered as an trustworthy representation of the Sunnah. Because okay, you have this relation between lafz, which has been discussed very early as well, as you know, in Hassan al-Basri, etc. So, and this is, I think, because today we have, at least in the West, we have a certain understanding of what authenticity is. And in fact, every understanding of authenticity is culturally and historically determined. And different cultures use different definitions of what authenticity is. And if you consider the definition of authenticity in classical hadith science, it would say the definition is the ittisaliya to the Prophet, actually. So this is the primary criteria of authenticity. It's not the exact correspondence of the lafz, you know, of the wording, because in fact the wording is actually from the Sahabi, if you consider it precisely. Because if you have the ahadith al-fi'aliyah, for example, okay, the hadith where the acts of the Prophet are related, the words are not from the Prophet but from the Sahabi. So the fundamental point is not whether the matan is according to the lafz, okay, the exact lafz, etc. Of course, this is the best case, okay, this is the idea which everybody seeks, but it's not a condition. A condition is that the Sahabi relates in a truthful manner. I mean that the testimony of the Sahabi is truthful, and here the Sunni point of view is that this is guaranteed. Okay, so this is an element of faith. Okay, it's part of the Aqidah, and this is what distinguishes actually the Sunni tradition from the Shia tradition, for example. So I think this is the question of Riwaya bil Ma'na is a very important question. But this is not exactly what I meant with this. I didn't address this actually in my paper.
I see there is another question from Habib Bilal.
Yes, sir. Assalamu alaikum to everyone. And, mashallah, sir. The lecture was amazing, but unfortunately, I joined a little bit late. When you were discussing the prophetology. So what I understood from your second last slide, that when we take any hadith or when we interpret any hadith, we must consider the seerah and the character of Prophet ﷺ. So does it mean that when we find any hadith which we see that is going against the moral teachings of Quran, or is going against the seerah of Prophet ﷺ, and we find that hadith with a sahih chain of narration, sahih sanad, for example in Sahih Bukhari or Muslim. So what we should do then? Should we reject that hadith completely, or should we interpret that hadith in such a way that it must, should not be contrary to the concept of Quran and the character and seerah of Prophet ﷺ?
Okay, thank you very much. This is an important question, very much discussed today. And this is discussed in terms of mukhtalif al-hadith, usually. In the classical sources, you have this discipline when there's ikhtilaf in some way. Okay? And this, let's say, this discussion came up when there was this conflict between Mu'tazili Islam and the Ahl Hadith sort of group. And you have Ibn Qutayba, for example, okay, who wrote on this and tried to show that this ikhtilaf, which you can find in Hadith, and which the Mu'tazila said is a problem, and it's a proof why this whole isnad system is not reliable as source for the Sunnah. And their argument was precisely, okay, there are some Hadiths, if you follow this isnad way of evaluation, you will say, okay, this Hadith is sahih, and there is ijma on it, etc. But it says something which is in contradiction to the Quran. Okay, this was their argument. But of course, then the question is, which reading of the Quran? Who decides what the Quran means in certain cases? Okay, so the problem is not really solved. So this is, as I said, a classical discussion. Mukhtalif al-Hadith Ibn Qutayba, then, as you said, try to show interpretations of the Hadith which show that, in fact, there's no contradiction. So there are different methods. Okay, there's a relation between what is what is khas, for example. Okay, what is valid in every case, and just in some cases, what the Prophet said to some individual, but which is not, doesn't regard everybody, or which he said in a certain historical moment, but which is, it was abrogated afterwards, etc. Okay, so this is a classical discussion. But there is one for today, okay, because this discussion today comes up in a new way, because you're not discussing whether, okay, there are some hadiths who contradict the Quran, but it's more fundamental. Do we trust into transmission in general? Okay, what is transmitted from earlier generations of ulama, etc. Do we have confidence in this, or do we need to reevaluate everything anew with new methods which we have, for example, from the new sciences, from modern sciences, from sociology, from I don't know, computer analysis, from historical sciences today, and the historical critical method, etc. So this debate, okay, is raised in a new way. But the problem is actually the same. And here is the theological foundation. If you say this hadith does not relate what the Prophet taught, okay, does not relate the prophetic teaching or practice because it contradicts with the Quran, the Sirah, or whatever. This presupposes, in some sense, that you know what the Prophet can have said and what a Prophet cannot have said. Because you say, a Prophet, okay, this hadith, this is not from the Prophet because the Prophet cannot have said something like this. Okay, so you are based on the content of the hadith, not on the transmission. Okay, this is the famous Matum criticism, okay, which is in Muhammad Abdu, and so in modern Islamic movements, okay, they say this is not system, okay, like the Mu'tazila, it's not reliable. We need to look at the content of the hadith. Okay, does the content make sense? Does it correspond to the Quran, etc.? The classical argument, and I think this is it's a valid argument, is to say, but how can you know, as a non-prophet, as a person who is not a prophet, how can you judge what a prophet can have said and what not? Because if you say this matan, okay, is not authentic, this because of its content, this implies that you know, okay, a prophet cannot have said this. And this is a theological problem, okay? There's a sort of contradiction because you cannot know because you are not on the same level of the Prophet. So what was the solution of the Ahl Hadith? They said, we don't look they did as well. In reality, they did, okay? But on the level of methodology, they said, we don't look really on the content, but we look on the quality of the transmission. If the transmitters were trustful, Odul, okay, here's the notion of Adala, etc. We take this. And then there's the question of ijma of the community. If the ulama of the community consider this hadith as representing truthfully, maybe not in love, but in mana, okay, what the Prophet taught and proclaimed, and we can accept this hadith. And then the question, if now we have such a hadith and it contradicts with Sirah, etc., we will look, okay, if the hadith contradicts it, does it have the same quality of transmission? Or is it weaker? Okay, if it is weaker, so we accept the one which is stronger. And we look at the history. Is it valid maybe only in Medina and the other one was in Mecca? But now Medina is, okay, so the question of abrogation. And towards the Quran, okay, does it, here it's more difficult, okay, here we have to do interpretation, etc. So there are then various methods, but the central problem is really, how can we as non-prophet judge what the Prophet has said, can have said, and what not? Okay, so this is like the problem. So I don't know if I answered your question, but it's an important question which is discussed very much today.
I think there is 2 more questions in chat box. One from Muhammad Amin. Can we say that there is a difference between companions and Muslims today in order to practice the hadith in lives? Because companions saw the Prophet and heard the hadith without disconnection. On the other hand, narration of hadith carry a possibility, not certainty for Muslims today. Maybe Salafis and Jihadists will not this is part.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. You're talking about the fact that the hadith scholars themselves, they do not claim a yaqeen, a certainty, okay, for Sahih hadith. I mean, this is stated in the Muqaddimah of Muqaddimah of Ibn Salah, for example. So the most known handbook of hadith sciences. At the beginning, you have the chapter on Sahih, and he states, what do the ulama mean when they say this hadith is Sahih? Today, everybody says this means the hadith is authentic. No, this is not exactly what they mean. They mean that the transmission of this hadith fulfills 5 criteria. Okay, the adal of the transmitters, the continuity, there's no shaz, no illa, etc. Okay, the 9 criteria. So if you say a hadith is sahih, it means only this. This transmission, this hadith, with the isnad, man, etc., fulfills 5 criteria. And then afterwards, there comes the judgment on the authenticity by the ulama. And here you have an additional factor, which is ijma. But not ijma in the sense that everybody agrees on the same thing, but that this hadith is used by the ulama, okay? It is used by the ummah, it becomes well known, it becomes accepted in the practice of the ummah. And only then you can say, okay, this hadith is considered authentic. Okay, only then you can say, okay, you can have yaqeen. Because la tajtamu ummati ala dalala. Okay, when the ummah agrees on something, there is a divine protection in some sense. Okay, and this you can argue theologically. It must be like this because Islam needs to be preserved until the end of times, etc. Okay, so you can develop this theological argumentation. But this means, okay, that Sahih Hadith, you have, as you say, only a probability. Ghalabat al-Dhann. Okay, this was Khatib al-Baghdadi who introduced this distinction, which came actually from the Mu'tazila at the origin. But he integrated it into the Sunni methodology. And he said, yes, it's true from the point of view of epistemology, okay, of the certainty of knowledge. A Sahih Hadith, because it's ahad, it's not mutawatir, is you don't have a 100% guarantee that this is what the Prophet said, etc. You only have evidences, okay, which show in this direction. And then it's the ulama at the end who judge whether, okay, we base it on this evidence and the fact that from our expertise, etc., we know that this is a prophetic word. Okay, at least from the mana. And here also, and this to come back to my talk, this is also because that transmission of hadith involves this experience of the prophetic speech. And the ulama, they do have this experience, okay? They do have this experimental knowledge, if you want, of the prophetic speech. So they can judge. It's not only saying, okay, this text fulfills 5 criteria, so this is not enough. It needs something more, okay? So in this sense, here the question, to come back to your question, of course, it's not the same as a Sahabi, okay, who saw the Prophet, who were with them, etc. But then it's a question, what is your relation to transmission and to the tradition, okay? Do you have trust or you're skeptical? And this is the question. If you have trust, you trust in the fact that that there's a continuity, okay, of this tradition which goes back to the Prophet himself, and that the Prophet himself was the origin of this very tradition, and that there is a sort of guarantee, divine guarantee, okay, which is related to the fact that Islam is the last religion and that it must be preserved, that the Sunnah must be preserved until the end of times, etc. So this is a more profound theological question, then I think, which is concerned here, and which is very important today, I think.
And if you don't mind, I think we can pick for one more last question. And there is one more question in chat box. He asks that in which point these Shia and other sects differ from Sunni scholars in transmitting hadith in pure form. Fine.
Sorry, I didn't understand the question. Could you repeat?
There's a question in chat box. He's asking about the Shia interpretations of hadith. In which point does the Shia and other sects differ from Sunni scholars in transmitting hadith in its
Yes. Yes, of course. There's a difference even in the definition of hadith, as you might know. For Sunni, hadith is something which has an isnad, this goes back to the Prophet. I mean, in the best case. And for Shia, this is not a condition. Okay, the isnad can go back to an imam, and if an imam says the Prophet has said, this is fine, even if there's no isnad, then which documents, okay, the transmission from the imam to the Prophet, because from the Shia point of view, the imams are a direct source of the Sunnah. Okay, so there's the imams, let's say, they play an equivalent role to the Sahabi in Sunni Islam. For the Sunni, it's the Suhbah of the Prophet ﷺ, which makes the Sahabi the testimonies of the Sunnah, who have authority, okay, the truthful testimonies of the Sunnah. And for the Shia, it's, let's say, it's not enough. It's the Ahl Bayt, okay? It's the fact to belong to the Ahl Bayt or to have supported the Ahl Bayt, you know, in the conflict between Sayyidina Ali and Sayyidina Muawiyah. So this is a different conception of the conditions of transmission, actually. Okay, one does, okay, it's the Suhbah, and the other one is it's a more dynastic understanding of transmission, let's say. Okay, it has to do with family relations, let's say. Whereas in the Sunni, no, this is not the point. It's the Suhbah. Okay, it's a fact of having believed in the Prophet and experienced him. Okay, having seen him, talk with him, etc. So I would say this is a difference, and this is why the definition of hadith in Shia Islam is different also. Okay, so you don't need the isnad back to the Prophet, because from their point of view, from the Shia point of view, if the Imams says the Prophet had said, it's like an isnad back to the Prophet for them. Okay, it's a different view of transmission.
Thank you, sir. I think we can conclude here. We are running out of time. And thank you for being here and taking your time. And
Thank you very much.
our webinar was a wonderful session. And
Thank you. I hope so.
Discussions and talks. It's indeed a great privilege to thank you, especially for making this webinar fruitful and constructive. And I would like to thank, on behalf of Jamia Madinatul Noor Department of Hadith Studies and our team and their Riwaya community for being here with us. And I hope you are supporting our future endeavors. And thank you for all participants for being here with us. Thank you. Jazakumullah. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure, and I hope that we will stay in contact somehow. Maybe one day I will visit you in India.
Sure, you're welcome. Marhaban.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.